For most of human history, nobody sold anything for this. Nobody whispered about it. Nobody pretended it wasn't happening. Half the human population menstruated for tens of thousands of years with no products, no privacy, and no cultural script telling them to be embarrassed about it. Then civilization showed up. And somehow a normal biological function became something shameful, hidden, and aggressively marketed back to the people experiencing it. But before all that, what did ancient women actually do? The answer is more practical, more social, and more surprising than most people expect. For roughly 300,000 years, human women lived in nomadic bands of 15 to 50 people. No agriculture, no permanent shelter, no supply chains, no concept of a store. Everything a woman needed had to either grow nearby, be hunted, or be made by hand from whatever the landscape offered. But before we get to what ancient women used, we need to establish something that reframes the entire question. Ancient women didn't get their periods anywhere near as often as modern women do. The average woman in an industrialized country today will have approximately 450 periods in her lifetime. A hunter-gatherer woman would have had closer to 100. That is not a small difference. That is a fundamentally different biological experience of being a woman. And understanding why that gap exists is the first piece of the answer. The reason ancient women had far fewer periods comes down to four things happening simultaneously: more pregnancies, longer breastfeeding, lower body fat, and near constant physical activity. A hunter-gatherer woman typically had her first pregnancy in her late teens. After that, she spent the majority of her reproductive years either pregnant or nursing. That matters because breastfeeding suppresses ovulation. Not casual breastfeeding, the kind of on-demand, around-the-clock nursing that hunter-gatherer mothers practiced for 2 to 4 years per child. That level of nursing delays the return of the menstrual cycle for most of that window. Beverly Strassmann, an anthropologist at the University of Michigan, spent years living among the Dogon people of Mali, studying exactly this pattern. The Dogon follow traditional practices that closely mirror pre-agricultural reproductive behavior. Her research documented that Dogon women who did not use contraception and followed traditional nursing patterns experienced dramatically fewer menstrual cycles across their lifetimes than women in industrialized societies, often fewer than 100 total. The modern body is not broken. It is just operating in a context it was never designed for. Stable food supplies mean lower physical stress and higher body fat, both of which accelerate the return of the menstrual cycle. Smaller family sizes mean fewer pregnancies. Formula feeding and early weaning mean ovulation returns faster after birth. Every convenient civilization built quietly pushed the number higher. You have almost certainly never been told that having 450 periods is historically abnormal. Most people haven't. It is treated as simply what it means to be a woman. It isn't. It is what it means to be a woman in the modern industrialized world. Those are very different things. When a period did arrive, ancient women solved the problem the way humans have always solved every physical problem. They used what was immediately around them: moss, soft animal hides cut into pads, dried grass bundled and shaped, strips of plant fiber. These are the materials most consistently identified by anthropologists studying early human hygiene practices. The direct archaeological evidence is limited organic materials decompose and rarely survive thousands of years in the ground. But ethnographic research on contemporary hunter-gatherer communities and early agricultural societies that developed independently of industrialized products fills the gap with striking consistency. Across cultures on separate continents with no contact with each other, researchers find the same category of solution: soft, absorbent natural materials, used and either discarded or cleaned and reused. Moss appears across multiple independent cultures as a preferred material. It is naturally soft, highly absorbent, and available across the majority of environments humans inhabited: forests, wetlands, northern tundra. Women in some Arctic indigenous communities were documented using it specifically for menstrual management well into the 20th century, not because they lacked access to manufactured products, but because the material genuinely worked and the knowledge had been passed down across generations. Animal hides, particularly the softer inner layers, served the same function in drier environments where moss was scarce. In warmer climates, cotton-like plant fibers, long before cotton was ever cultivated, were gathered and used. The specific material changed with the landscape. The underlying principle never did. None of this required invention. It required observation, and the passing of practical knowledge from older women to younger ones. No packaging, no instructions, no infrastructure. Just women teaching women what worked, generation after generation, for hundreds of thousands of years. Here is where the story gets genuinely strange. Ancient humans may have been tracking menstrual cycles before they were tracking anything else. The Ishango bone, discovered in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo and dated to roughly 20,000 years ago, is a baboon fibula covered in deliberate, carefully grouped notch marks. The marks are organized into specific numerical sequences. Several researchers have argued those sequences align with lunar cycles and with the average length of a human menstrual cycle, approximately 28 to 29 days. Alexander Marshak, a researcher who spent decades analyzing notched bones and early cave markings, made the case that prehistoric humans were using objects like the Ishango bone as timekeeping tools, and that menstruation was likely the original reason anyone started keeping time at all. The logic is straightforward. The menstrual cycle is predictable. It repeats on a reliable schedule. It connects directly to pregnancy, and therefore to survival. In a world with no external clocks, no written numbers, and no formal calendar system, a woman's body was one of the most consistent rhythmic patterns that any human had direct access to. Whether the Ishango bone is definitively a menstrual calendar is still debated among researchers. The interpretation is contested. But the underlying argument holds regardless. In a culture tracking the world for the first time, a repeating biological event that mattered enormously for survival would have been among the first things worth counting. The menstrual cycle wasn't something ancient humans worked around. In some contexts, it was the framework they built everything else on top of. There was no hiding it. This is the part most modern people don't stop to think about. In a nomadic band of 15 to 50 people with no separate rooms, no private shelter, no way to disappear quietly, a woman's period was not a private event. The people sleeping an arm's length away knew. The people sharing the morning fire knew. The women in the group almost certainly cycled together over time, as research on menstrual synchrony in close proximity groups suggests. It was visible, it was known, and there was no cultural expectation that it should be otherwise. In many documented hunter-gatherer societies, that social visibility came with communal structure. In some groups, menstruating women stepped back from specific, physically demanding work during the first day or two, not because they were considered impure or incapable, but because the community had built practical accommodation for it into daily life. In other communities, menstruation carried specific social significance, a marker of reproductive status, a moment acknowledged rather than concealed. The details varied across cultures and geography. The consistent thread was that it was not hidden. The insistence that menstruation be invisible, managed in total silence, never mentioned, concealed at all costs, is not ancient. It is not biological. It arrived with specific agricultural and later industrial societies that built elaborate frameworks around female bodies and what they were allowed to mean publicly. That framework is a few thousand years old at most. The species is 300,000 years old. We built a world that solved a lot of the inconvenience. Products engineered for comfort, discretion, and hygiene. That is genuinely useful. Nobody is arguing it isn't, but somewhere inside the system we built, the thing itself became shameful. Menstruation became something to conceal completely, never mention in mixed company, manage in perfect silence, and critically feel embarrassed about if it ever became visible. A billion-dollar industry exists specifically to ensure nobody ever knows it's happening. That industry did not exist for 299,900 years of human history. It is extraordinarily new, and it did not emerge because women asked for shame to come bundled with the product. Ancient women had roughly 1/3 the periods modern women have. They managed them with materials pulled from the ground. Some of them may have counted those cycles on bone before they counted anything else. And they did all of it in full view of the people around them, with no apparent cultural expectation that it should be treated as a secret. The suffering we now treat as simply part of being a woman, the frequency, the silence, the shame, is not a feature of the human body. It is a feature of the world we built around it, and the body has not forgotten what normal used to feel like.